Welcome back to Kings of the North, Lesmerises and Bill Landis, and all of our lovely followers here on YouTube Live. If you're watching on YouTube, howdy. If you're watching back later on YouTube, howdy. If you're listening on a podcast feed later, hello as well. Bill, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm really feeling the new intro music that we had nothing to do with. It was just the thing that StreamYard decided it was going to put in there, but yeah. I like the vibes of it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's more our vibe. It's more our vibe. Yeah. We appreciate that. And maybe we'll have different intro music sometime down the road. We are getting ready for spring football. We're getting ready for spring football, Bill Landis. And I did go through, and are you aware that some of our teams have actually already started spring football?
I actually wasn't. I was curious if that was the case. I know this time last year we had a few that had started.
Yeah.
But the calendar's kind of wonky, so I wasn't sure this year.
Spring football is exploding and dying like a black hole before our very eyes, much like the rest of the college football calendar. Not college football, but college football, like the logistics of college football are exploding as we know it. So we have 3 teams that have already started. I went through as much as I could searching for everybody, and I couldn't quite find the dates officially for everyone, but West Virginia started on February 25th. They already have 3 in. Rich Rod's out there in the world getting stuff done. BYU started on February 27th, and Kansas started yesterday. So those are our 3 that are in, and Purdue starts tomorrow. And then most of the other ones, as far as I could tell, March 10th, Illinois, Cincinnati, March 11th, Colorado, Boston College, March 13th, Wisconsin, March 17th, Ohio State, March 18th, Michigan State, March 20, Minnesota, Utah, March 21, Syracuse, March 25, Penn State, Iowa State. Then I found 11 that I couldn't quite nail down. There are some, like Washington's always late. Washington's spring game's not till May 2nd, so they'll get started later. Oregon's in late April for their spring game. Nebraska's spring something is late April. Iowa's is late April. So anyway, we actually have started spring football. Woo! Congratulations. Happy spring football to everybody.
Happy spring football. Also interesting within that is that quite a few teams will, I guess, be still going on when the transfer portal window opens.
When's it open?
Third week of April.
Now we're just knee deep in logistics. Yeah. So again, all this
the 13th, stuff I believe April 13th.
All this stuff still doesn't quite make sense. You know, I understand schools doing what they want to do based on their weather, based on their class schedule, all that kind of thing. But we are going to do 10 players we think could break out in spring football. That is the thrust of this show. We're also going to do a little bit about the NFL Combine. So it's over some of the guys from the North who really popped there. And just as a reminder to people, we did this same show a year ago, Bill Landis, and we will remind people of the 10 players we talked about a year ago as possible spring breakouts. In fact, you were going back and looking at things and said, hey, we did this a year ago. And I said, good job, let's do it. Right. So it's like, hey, Doug, are you planning shows? Are you just watching the Oscars? What are you doing? It's like, oh, yeah, let's do that. Notre Dame running back Jeremiyah Love, Ohio State receiver Jeremiah Smith, 2 of the 10 players we talked about a year ago at this time. So, like, it can matter.
Yeah. Jeremiah Smith, we were the first to tell you folks that he was going to be good. Don't forget it.
Yeah, we own that. Everybody was like, a Jeremiah who? And we were like, we got Love and Smith for you. So there's some things in there. Some of these breakouts are transfers. Some of them are second-year guys ready to pop, which is what Jeremiah Love was a year ago. He had contributed as a true freshman, and then you said, boom, bang, he's going to get a chance to play, and you were right. He was awesome. Jeremiah Smith was a true freshman. I'm not sure if we have any true freshmen on our list of 10 this time. But it's a good way to get us through, get us ready for spring ball, which is time to do. But can we sew a shirt? I can't wait on the shirt. We got to show a shirt first.
Go.
If you're watching on YouTube, this is one of those where it's better if you watch on YouTube. On the podcast, we'll try to describe it. This is our guy, Clem, who sent this in and brought this to our attention. And then I looked, and it is available out in the world. It is a shirt that says Kings of the South, and it is a bulldog, a Georgia bulldog, sitting in a lounge chair in front of a fireplace with all the heads on the wall of the teams in the South that they beat last year, including a big Longhorn, including Georgia Tech. And Bill, it is a regional celebration because they have to make excuses about not winning the whole thing, which is what we thought this show was going to be. Greatest proof yet that our entire concept changed because the North rose up. You aren't only the kings of the North anymore. You are the kings of the North and you are the kings of college football. And they've made a shirt for Georgia. It is an excuse-making shirt. I swear to God, we're half a step away from a show. We're half a step away from a Kings of the South show because that's all they can claim. My God, I have to get this shirt. You want to buy a shirt?
No, I want to go. This looks like it's at a softball game. So I would like to go down to the softball game and just stand next to that guy with a T-shirt that says, "And then what happened?"
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, this is our guy in here. Is in here. A frat guy was wearing it at an intramural game. God, I love it. We're gonna get him for everybody. It's like I'm in the bar. This is a round on the house. Everybody that's in the YouTube chat right now, you get a free Kings of the South Georgia shirt, but you got to wear it and mock them. So it's proof of continuing proof of concept, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, like they're right. Come on. Oh my God, it was so good. I never would have expected it.
Yeah.
The ACC has a plan. We're going to talk about that too. A little logistics here. Feels like the ACC is going to be saved. And the bottom line, and Pete Thamel at ESPN and Ross Dellinger at Yahoo, and everybody's reporting it on Monday morning. They're going to agree to this thing like tomorrow. This is going to be like the Clemson board, the Florida State board, and everybody in the ACC are going to agree to this because the whole thing had been Florida State and Clemson felt like they could make more money elsewhere, so they wanted out. And the same thing happened in the Big 12 when Texas and Oklahoma left, but the Big 12 found a way to survive. The Big 12 added Colorado and Arizona State, and previously it added BYU and Cincinnati, found a way to survive, right? Congratulations to the Big 12, and found a way to kind of make the idea that there wasn't a traditional blue blood, there wasn't an obvious power. They tried to make that a positive in that conference instead of a negative, and I think they've done it fairly successfully. I think there were a lot of questions about whether the ACC would be able to do the same if Clemson and Florida State left. It would have been a harder sell, would it not? Yeah. Than what the Big 12 was able to do after losing Texas and Oklahoma?
I think so. There's just not quite as much, I think, to hang your hat on there if you're the ACC in that kind of world.
Yeah. So, okay. That threatens a conference. We already saw one blow up. Now we are threatening another one. Could the ACC cease to exist? Instead, what it feels like is going to happen is everybody's going to agree to this, and it's going to be a thing, Bill. And this is the main topic I want to cover because I do think it's interesting. Unbalanced revenue killed the Big 12 in a lot of ways originally, right? That Texas wanted to do its own thing. Texas didn't want to share. I think we've seen the most successful conferences, the Big 10 and the SEC. Everybody shares that revenue equally, even while acknowledging, of course, there are teams that are more valuable, that are more successful, but you share the revenue. And this is the ACC saying, we're not going to do that. So by the reporting that is out there from multiple people, I think it's going to be 40% of the revenue is going to be distributed equally. And then the other 60% is going to be distributed based on your TV ratings. And they already had implemented previously last year how successful you are on the football field. For instance, SMU and Clemson got extra money last year for making the college football playoff. So they already had been partway down that road. So, Bill, this is the question I want to ask. Can this succeed as partially we're sharing it, but also we're going to, and I do think it's important to, if you're going to reward things, they're rewarding two things that are related but not the same. One is brand and TV ratings, and one is on-field success. Often over the course of history, on-field success leads to bigger TV ratings, but it's not the same thing. SMU doesn't have huge TV ratings, but they earned a spot in the playoff last year, so they got extra money for that. That world where it's split that way, some even, some based on TV, some based on success. Can the ACC survive, at least for a little while, that way?
I think, till the grant of rights expires and teams try to leave again. Yeah. Because part of the deal too is that they're lowering the buyout price, right? In 2029 or 2020 or 2030 or something like that to get out. So for the next 5-6 years.
Short-term stability.
I think yes, I think that will be achieved. And then we'll do this song and dance again in 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think ideally in a strong, healthy, forward-looking, stable conference, hoping for long-term viability, I think you've got to share it equally. In a conference drowning, desperately trying to stay alive, it's like, all right, I don't know, I'll give you guys a little bit extra just so you don't leave, because it's better for the teams. And again, the reporting is saying it could be the teams at the top, Clemson, Florida State, maybe if Miami gets it going, they could make like $15 million more a year than they're making now. And then the teams who aren't that might make $7 million less a year than they're making now, but that's still more. And we're looking at it for our three northern teams, Pitt, Syracuse, Boston College. Even if you're taking a cut, you're probably still going to make more than if the ACC ceased to exist. Yes. Than if Florida State and Clemson left and you were now a kind of a group of five conference, right?
The Mountain East. Yeah.
The Mountain East. Oh, that's good. That's like a good name though. Oh, actually now I'm, because who would you add? The way that the Big 12 was kind of able to add and kind of get, maybe they lost some quality at the top, but they added some really nice quantity, and that quantity had some quality too. I don't know that the ACC sees that. I'm not sure. Like, I don't know. Yeah, UConn or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. So I do think for a little stability for now, it kind of seems like okay for everybody. And then, by the way, if you're Clemson and Florida State, who we don't care about, being the kings of your conference rather than trying to get the fifth bid in the SEC, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not such a terrible thing. I do think schools like that can look in the mirror sometimes and say, why do we want to make sure that we're trying to beat Texas and Georgia and LSU every year?
That is part of this that I think is interesting, is like now Florida State and Clemson like kind of put their swords down and take a beat. Ooh. And then maybe get to do a bit of studying of Oklahoma's life in the SEC and figure out if that's actually the life they want to live. Like, it's maybe not the worst thing in the world for Florida State and Clemson. Maybe they'll, at the end of it, they'll decide, yes, it's still worth it because the payday will be more. But maybe they'll see Oklahoma drift off into not being so relevant as they used to be, and maybe that's not a world that Florida State and Clemson want to live in.
USC in the Big Ten, same kind of thing. Like Texas is going to be fine. Oregon's going to be fine. Right. So if you're at the top of your game, then you can survive anywhere. But like, have Florida State and Clemson been at their top of their game? Like, like the last couple of years, this is not quite Deshaun Watson peak Dabo Clemson, and Florida State was horrible this year. So anyway, it seems okay. But from the perspective of, it seems okay for Syracuse, Pitt, and Boston College. Do you agree with that? That this is a for now decent solution?
Yeah, I think those three teams in particular just wanted to find some stability is the word that you use. Yeah. And I think this is, even if it's short term, a bit of a Band-Aid, I think this will help them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. You want to do spring breakouts?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. And let's start with an offensive lineman, because this is your first name on the list. Mm-hmm. And it is a Penn State offensive lineman. And one of the things that's interesting about this, Bill, is that Penn State is returning a ton on the offensive line and feeling very good, but they also might have a dude who's ready to start for the first time and really make a difference.
Yeah, and this is me stealing your thunder a little bit. It's Cooper Cousins from Penn State. He's a second-year player, and you, I think, last year were the first one to kind of put him on our radar as a guy that Penn State was very excited about. But then that excitement just never dampened throughout the year. He played in every game. Played 312 snaps combined on offense and special teams. Played mostly at guard, but did play a little bit at center. And as you mentioned, Penn State does have quite a bit coming back on its offensive line. They had they had 7 offensive linemen who played 100 snaps, not 100 who played 7. They had 7 offensive linemen who played 100 snaps last year. 6 of them are back, including Cooper Cousins. But the one who's leaving is Sal Wormley, who was a starting right guard. So there is a vacancy there that and it seems like everyone who covers Penn State is fully expecting Cooper Cousins to fill. So this was the kid who was the number 1 interior offensive lineman in the 2024 recruiting class. And then I think kind of backed up that pedigree when he got on campus and backed it up last year and the snaps that he was able to play. And it seems like he's plug and play ready to be Penn State starting right guard this fall, and then maybe the center of the future once Nick Dawkins is gone. But I just think a player who is on the cusp of kind of vaulting himself into conversation of like premier interior offensive lineman in college football, and this is sort of his spring, I think, to really start breaking out.
And this seems like one of these things. And again, part of the deal at Penn State is like they have 3 tackles back, right? Because Anthony Donko got hurt last year, and then Nolan Rucci filled in really well, and Drew Shelton, right, at left tackle is still back. So like that's it. It feels like Cousins could be the guy, because if you have all these veteran guys who have played and have played well, and then you're inserting a guy who maybe in 3 years could be a first-round NFL draft pick, who starts to look dominant. Now you start, that's what national championship teams do. Oh, we're good and we're deep and we're veteran. And oh, by the way, and it's, we're only going to make 1,000 Ohio State, Penn State comparisons this year, just like we made 1,000 Penn State, Michigan comparisons last year. Ohio State had a bunch of veteran dudes back who knew what they were doing, and their 2 best players were new guys who were young, and Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. It might be a little weird to be like, oh, this offensive guard is going to be the Caleb Downs or Jeremiah Smith of Penn State in 2025. But it's the same idea, that you have great veteran players and a depth of experience, but you got some young dudes who are going to have like the potential to be awesome right away.
Yeah, you're right. But also, if you factor in the kind of offense that I think Penn State will want to be, which is like we're all interested in the progression that Drew Aller makes, but like Penn State's going to run the ball. You're going to have Nick Singleton and Katron Allen back, and like 4.5 offensive line starters with a big old offensive. Like they're going to lean on teams. That is going to be their preferred method. So like then suddenly a guard becomes very important. So Penn State had an excellent offensive line last year, and with almost all of it back, and I think you probably maybe would also say too, like Sal Wormley had a good year. He may have been their worst starter on the offensive line too. So it's like the four best starters are back. You have 3 guys you can start a tackle, and now here comes this young kid, Cooper Cousins, to like give you a jolt of energy into what was already going to be a very good offensive line. It's not just me like leaning into the meme of being a guy who enjoys offensive line play. Like, I truly do think this could be a pretty impactful addition to Penn State's offense because of what they want to be on that side of the ball.
There's a chance that by the time Ohio State is playing Oregon, it's by the time Penn State's playing Oregon and then playing Ohio State, that this offensive line has moved from really good to like, oh my God, they're destroying people.
Yeah, definitely.
And if they are in destroying people mode with 2 really good backs, then it's like, I don't know how much the other stuff matters, right? And now we're back a little bit. Now we're maybe talking about a Michigan model where you have a really good defense and you just can you can run over people with offensive line and running back play. And then your quarterback has to make some throws on 3rd down. And that's a completely different model. I don't know. Is 2 years ago Michigan not a possible model for Penn State this year in 2025?
I think it could be. Yeah. Which is interesting. Like for all the notoriety that Drew Aller gets and like how much he'll be in the crosshairs with draft people and stuff. It's like, I don't actually know that it's on his shoulders this year, which is actually probably a great dynamic for Drew, but might be a hard analysis for people who want to see Drew Aller throw for like 4,000 yards next year. I don't think that's the kind of offense that Penn State's going to have.
Can you imagine if Penn State comes into Columbus and doesn't throw the ball in the second half and wins? You know, like this, like we're just like, and all we're talking about breakouts. We're talking about possibilities. But if a young guy like this helps Penn State make that next step, that's why this guy matters.
Yes.
Because your guy, what's his name? Vengaiwani at left guard.
Yeah.
He's going to destroy people, right? So if you have 2 guards destroying people, it makes you happy. You can act like, I don't want people to think I just picked this because I'm an offensive line guy. You lie in bed at night and dream of 2 athletic guards pulling and destroying people. It's what you live for.
Yeah, one of whom is like 360 pounds. Yeah,
that's what you live for. Okay, all right. We'll go to my first one, and mine is very different. Mine is a veteran guy who is kind of looking for a home, and it's Dasan McCullough, who is a 4th-year player and is going to be at Nebraska this year and is almost going to be kind of playing like a different position because Matt Rule has already talked about him a lot. And again, thanks to the beat reporters who cover all this kind of stuff. about Dasan McCullough, he said he's an absolute great athlete that people have tried in a lot of different spots. So you see kind of a player who hasn't really found his home. And that's not talking about at his previous teams with Indiana for 1 year and Oklahoma for 2 years. It's more about position. And they're talking about this guy has kind of been like a hybrid safety linebacker at times and maybe like a hybrid linebacker end. And they think they're going to let him rush the passer. And so this is the guy, he's the son of Dylan McCullough, who has been a very successful running backs coach at both the NFL and college level. He was going to go to Notre Dame. No, he's going to go to Ohio State. No, where's he going to go? He wound up going to Indiana because his dad was coaching at Indiana, but then his dad left Indiana to go to Notre Dame. And then so anyway.
He was an Ohio State commit.
He was an Ohio State commit. So Dasan McCullough played 477 snaps at Indiana as a true freshman. Year 2 at Oklahoma, he played 276. And then last year at Oklahoma, he got hurt. And he only played 160 snaps. So this is a borderline 5-star guy who's on his 3rd team and has not yet played 1,000 career snaps, who has a chance, I think, in this John Butler defense. And they've been talking about that with Nebraska. They're going to be like a 3-3-5. Are they going to be a 3-4? They're going to be a 4-3. I think he's going to be kind of a stand-up rush end a lot. And they also have Williams Nawari, who is a transfer that is a big deal, right? That's a big deal on Nebraska's defensive line. They have a couple transfers in here that could really matter. But the idea of this guy finally getting to settle in, he's had a weird career, and I think a lot of it's not his fault. But he might be a 10-sack guy for a Nebraska team trying to make a leap.
It's interesting to me that the college football does seem to have a hard time with guys like this.
Yes.
Where it's like the NFL is just like, he's an edge rusher. What are you talking about?
Yes.
But they just arrive at that point very quickly. And for Dasan McCullough, even they're not the same player, but the shorthand is like Micah Parsons, right? Just like that, kind of tweener physically, although McCullough is 6'5" and pretty long.
6'5",
he's just
235. Yep.
Yeah, he's maybe on the skinnier side for defensive lineman. His snap counts by position, if you look at Pro Football Focus, is nuts. Going year by year, he has as many snaps on the defensive line as he has playing slot corner. It's just how does somebody accomplish that? So he's incredibly versatile. I do think, because I followed him a little bit coming out of high school because he was committed to Ohio State. He always to me seemed like probably destined to be more on the line of scrimmage than not. I guess there was also sort of the Isaiah Simmons from Clemson projection out there for him too. But how many guys in football can you say he's either a hybrid safety linebacker or he's a defensive end? There are plenty of guys who get called in between safety and linebacker, and plenty of guys who get called in between linebacker and defensive end. I don't know that there are a lot of guys who get called in between all of it. But that does seem to have happened for Dasan McCullough. So I'm happy that Nebraska seems like they're going to streamline that a little bit, because I think that makes the most sense for him.
Yeah, there's a couple. Marquise Watson-Trent's another guy, is a transfer from Georgia Southern at linebacker. I feel like Nebraska defensively is plugging in maybe 3 or 4 guys who have a chance to make an impact at a place that has a defensive identity. They even remember him, Nebraska playing Indiana when he was a true freshman in Indiana, and he had 5 tackles and a sack against Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of oh yeah, remember that guy was good. So anyway, I think this matters because I think if Nebraska can have a base of what they do defensively, but they add 2 or 3 difference makers against strategic portal additions, this is how they would maybe have a chance to make a leap from just a bowl team to a team that is something potentially much more than that in 2025. All right.
Yep.
Who's your next guy?
My next guy, a little off the radar maybe for a lot of people. Nolan Ray, who's running back at Maryland. He's a 3rd-year player who was their backup running back last year, but I think the expectation is he's about to step up and become running back 1, because Roman Hemby, who I also think is very good and I considered mentioning on this list, has transferred to Indiana, where I think he'll have a fine time there being a productive running back. But Ray, last year, 75 carries, 374 yards, 5 yards per carry average, 2 touchdowns. The numbers that jumped out to me when I was looking at stuff on a relatively small workload, I guess, 4.2 yards after contact per rush, which is quite good. If you're getting over 4, it's very good. 35% breakaway yards, which is yards on runs that are 15 yards or more. That's actually pretty good too. 27 missed tackles forced. Then he also had 11 receptions for 76 yards on 17 targets. He only played 1 game in 2023 as a true freshman. And then he hurt his knee and didn't play the rest of the year. And then last year he was the backup to Hemby, but popped in a way that I thought was interesting. And now he's going to be in a backfield, presumably with Justin Martin from the transfer from UCLA, who's got a bit of dual threat to him too. And I actually think Maryland's done a decent job in the transfer portal with its offensive line. I'm not entirely sure what that offense is going to look like. Like they lose Ty Felton, who was an incredibly prolific receiver. So maybe they're more of like a run-oriented offense with a dual threat at quarterback. And if that's the case, then I could see Ray being someone who might pop a little bit this year. He's from Michigan. I believe he was the number one running back prospect in the state of Michigan in 2023. So there's a little bit of a recruiting pedigree there for a guy who was like a higher end 3-star sort of prospect. But I think Maryland has been like a sneaky good running back program, just like finding under the radar guys who end up being pretty good. And Nolan Ray, I think, could be maybe the next guy on that list.
Jeremiyah Love trajectory light, right? You do a little bit as a freshman, and then if you're kind of the guy in year 2, I was curious because, and it's always like, oh, well, spring breakouts. What do? One of the things is you kind of look for departed guys who left holes.
Yeah.
So I think to find like, hey, Roman Hemby left to go to Indiana. What's Maryland going to do? This is a little. I thought maybe one of us would go here with Kyle Monangai leaving Rutgers as the number 1 back. But it's a little less clear there. Antoine Raymond was the guy who kind of stepped in as the number 2 back last year after Sam Brown got hurt. Sam Brown was doing some really good things and then got hurt in the middle of the year. Raymond ran for 100 yards against Kansas State in the bowl game, but they also added CJ Campbell from Florida Atlantic, who had 844 rushing yards at Florida Atlantic next year. So I do think at Rutgers, like to watch maybe Raymond and Campbell in spring, see how that shakes out, who's going to be the main guy. With Kyle Monangai gone is interesting, but it feels like Nolan Ray has a little better grasp on it, and maybe he'll start doing some things in March that make people think like, oh man, okay, like this guy could be 1,000-yard back in this season.
Yeah, we'll see. I think perhaps his yards after contact per rush, by the way, was 9th in the North among running backs with at least 50 attempts last year.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Nolan Ray. He's the photo on the YouTube thumbnail too. If you're finding this, you found the show on YouTube. It's like, oh yeah, that was Nolan Ray. All right, next one up. This is a transfer, another transfer, but a young transfer. And this is a little bit like Davis and Igbenogson transfer a couple years ago. It's a corner who is transferring after 1 year after playing as a true freshman somewhere else. And it's Amarian Fortenberry, who played at South Alabama as a kind of under-recruited guy and started at South Alabama, went in the portal, and has landed at Kansas State where they need help because like Jacob Parrish went to the NFL. And he's 5'11", 175. He was pretty highly ranked in the portal. There are already some like Jacob Parrish comparisons. His coach Van Malone has been quoted as saying like he's like a handle his business kind of guy, which what Jacob Parrish was. Kind of like he started 8 games as a true freshman. The one thing I like, he had 10 tackles and 2 pass breakups against LSU last season when South Alabama played LSU. And these are the kind of stories I'm still probably overall, like many college football fans, like many of our viewers and our listeners, somewhat conflicted about the transfer portal. I still kind of feel bad for lower level teams that find good players and then their reward is see you later. That good young player is now headed to a bigger program. But I also like the idea of a young guy who's not that high on the recruiting radar, and he plays LSU and has 10 tackles and is like, I can do this. And he said that was kind of the moment when he realized, oh, okay, wait, maybe this can be a thing. And he goes in the portal, and a lot of people want him. The Kansas State defense is interesting. Gabe Powers at linebacker, transfer from Ohio State, is another guy I considered as a possible guy here. Gunnar Maldonado, transfer at safety, is a guy that we have already talked about. Again, Kansas State is like the co-favorite to win the Big 12. They have Austin Romaine and like a couple really good. They're losing some guys on defense clearly, but they also have some guys back. But you can see strategic portal additions of guys who really have a chance to help them right away. And Fortenberry, if you can come in, you lose a great corner, you're not sure, you add a young corner, he's got 3 years of eligibility left. Like him hitting, I think is really important to Kansas State, because if If they kind of feel, hey, we lost Jacob Parrish, what happened? Oh, we got this young guy, Fortenberry. He's ready to do it. That's huge. And at a place like Kansas State, sometimes I think in the past, that was maybe what separated Kansas State from Texas and Oklahoma is like you don't have just the pipeline of every time you lose a great player, you have the depth that's automatically there. But now if you can add a guy from South Alabama who becomes that depth and becomes that new young starter for you, that changes everything. So I feel bad for South Alabama. I feel good for Fortenberry. I feel good for Kansas State, but I think he really matters to what they're going to do.
I agree with all that. They needed to address secondary too. It's like, if you look at like kind of weak links, like pass defense was not great for Kansas State last year. So I likewise looked at Powers and Maldonado, but I figured we talked about Maldonado. But like you had Maldonado, you had Fortenberry. It's like Maldonado's got a bit of a body of work. Fortenberry is like a projection play that I really like. You're right, it does suck, I guess, for programs like South Alabama, but also not the worst thing in the world for South Alabama to become a place where guys think to themselves like, oh, I can go there and play well, then go off to the P5, right? Like there's some value there too, I think, for some of those smaller programs.
And like a kid who was from Mississippi, who was kind of like a 2-star recruit, might go start a game in Ireland in the second year in college. Like what the heck? Like what a thing. What a thing. So could be a really good match here. All right, next up for you, what do you got?
Young guy, second-year player from Syracuse, King Joseph Edwards, defensive end. Pretty highly rated recruit in Fran Brown's first recruiting class out of Georgia. Went to the same high school as Caleb Downs, actually. But then like didn't play a ton last year. Like he redshirted. It's weird. If you look at PFF, they have him as playing in 5 games plus a bowl game, but Syracuse's website said he only played in 4 games plus a bowl game. So I'll trust Syracuse and assume that he ended up redshirting last year by playing 4 regular season games and 1 bowl game. He had 3 sacks against Holy Cross in their game early in the year.
Oh,
and then like kind of didn't do a whole lot. Fran Brown last year was talking about how he's got King Joseph Edwards has a ton of upside as a former 4-star prospect, but was specialized almost entirely into pass rushing situations. If you look at his snap count, almost all of them are passing downs. The little that he did have. But Syracuse is losing Fadil Diggs. They do have some other stuff back at the defensive end position and brought in at least one transfer to help address that too. But King Joseph Edwards to me looks like someone who like maybe he has to take a year to get used to the college game and develop physically and learn the speed of things. But by year 2, he should be like starting to break out a little bit as a guy who Syracuse hoped would be a premier pass rusher in his career with the Orange. So I think that starts with probably making him more of an every down player than he was last year when they only used him in pass rushing situations. But it's just a young guy going into a second year with a good recruiting pedigree and a team that is looking to replace a decent amount of pass rushing production with Fadil Diggs going off to the NFL. So King Joseph Edwards looks like someone to me who may not only be on the precipice of breaking out, but I think Syracuse like needs to have a breakout too.
And this is one of those, I think it's usually when we're doing stuff like this, we're trying to find guys who are individually important, but also might represent something. The idea that Fran Brown at Syracuse can go find an interesting Georgia high school prospect and have him pop and impact the program at Syracuse in year 2 is like, this is all of like the Fran Brown stuff coming together. A Northern guy who then coached at Georgia, who has some recruiting ties down there. And can you make a program like Syracuse, an attractive place for some of those 3-star guys in the South? That's where the winning starts, Landis. So like this is huge.
It is huge, but it's one thing to make those early inroads and get a guy like King Joseph Edwards, but like you're not going to get the next one unless King Joseph Edwards is good, right?
Exactly.
It's like you are asking players to chart a bit of a different path by leaving the South to go to Syracuse. But if you have proof of concept, it's like an easier sell. Yeah. So this is pretty important, I think, for Fran Brown to continue doing that.
I agree. All right, quick break. We still have an Oregon guy to talk about in a breakout. We have an Ohio State guy. We have a Wisconsin guy. We have a couple other guys, Kansas guy to talk about. We're also going to do a little combine stuff, and we're going to remind you of who we talked about a year ago. We'll do all of that next on Kings of the North. back on Kings of the North. Give us a like, subscribe, drop a review. I think the latest review on the podcast feed on Apple is still someone wondering about why I cried on one of the shows. So, which I'm more than willing to own, but also it'd be nice to have a fresh review there. Maybe knock that one down a couple spots, right? Like, we don't. I just don't want people to think we always cry. We sometimes cry. That's certainly we sometimes cry.
There's no we. There, you sometimes.
You haven't cried yet on the show? Are we sure about that? You haven't cried at all? No,
I don't think so.
Someone else to make you cry? I thought you didn't cry about like Cooper Cousins might be so good. I'm so excited to talk about offensive linemen in spring football. No, none of that.
No, not yet. But there's time.
Vengawani going in motion didn't make you cry last year.
Oh, maybe that might. That actually might have. That might have.
It's beautiful. Happy tears. Happy tears. All right. Let's talk about the NFL Combine a little bit. I didn't pay a ton of attention. You and I have been there many, many times before. We did not go this year. We actually were at a different place last week for some work stuff, which should lead to some very interesting things here at Kings of the North. We'll just tease you with that. Stuff happened there that mattered. I still it feels like maybe just like everything else, maybe the Combine is losing a little bit of how much it matters. Not everybody does everything. You know, a lot of the guys, Notre Dame and Ohio State guys who are playing the national championship game on January 20th were like, well, I don't know if I really got the plan for this. So maybe they didn't do everything. Who knows what the future of the Combine is, but there are still guys there who popped. So we just want to run through some of the Northern guys who popped, just like reading people, looking at times. There's actually the NFL.com database of what guys did at the Combine is officially ridiculous now. I don't know. Maybe this is a good use of AI. I couldn't believe all the stuff you could look at. So I have a wingspan thing to talk about at the end. Okay. If you want to talk a little wingspan, okay.
Sure.
That might make you cry. I got wingspan numbers that will test your tear ducts, Bill Landis. Okay. So get ready.
Right. Let's do it.
But let's start with Jalen Noel. Iowa State kind of killed the Combine. Jalen Noel, former guest of the show. We talked about him a ton going into the 2024 season. He and Jaden Higgins both had 1,000 yards. They lived up to it. They helped lead Iowa State to the first 11-win season in program history. 41.5-inch vertical leap, which was tied for the second best at the entire Combine, best among receivers. 11 feet 2-inch broad jump, which was best among receivers, tied for second at the entire Combine. Ran a 4.39 40 and is just like a guy that when you watch him. So there's a couple of things there. You can either confirm, right? Two good ways to make people sit up and notice you at the Combine. Confirm what tape shows or make people realize you're even better than tape shows. This is a lot of confirmation, Landis. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he was sort of like the deep threat for Iowa State. He was the explosive guy. And I think then he plays that way, but then he also tested that way. And I think it was in a way, and he wasn't just good. He was like the best. He wasn't the fastest, but I think he was the most explosive receiver at the Combine. It doesn't sound like anybody thinks he's going to be a first-round pick, but there's all kinds of second-round receivers that really make an impact. And I think he absolutely proved to people that he is a no doubt about it NFL athlete who, by the way, had incredible production at Iowa State.
Yeah, I think maybe he solidified himself as a second-round pick from what I'm seeing. Like some of the receivers who seem to make, like Matthew Golden from Texas made a big move. I think Luther Burden at Missouri. But Jalen Noel maybe I don't know, was on the edge of being like a third or fourth round pick maybe, and now it feels like he's a second round pick, which like that's where teams are still drafting starters in those first 3 rounds. And I think the biggest thing for guys like Noel is you want the athletic testing to sort of match what you feel like you see on tape. If it doesn't match, it's a problem. But if it matches or even succeeds, which I think might have happened here, or exceeds, excuse me, that's a major deal that gives you a big bump. And it seems like Noel got that.
And I don't know. I mean, these guys are expert tape watchers. I do feel like sometimes if you're not doing it at Alabama, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, like, oh, he looks good on tape. He looks explosive on tape in the Big 12. at Iowa State. And I don't know that that's fair, but do you think that exists in how even NFL scouts view things?
I think there's a bit of a bias there. Yeah. That you have to overcome if you're from one of those leagues.
Yeah. So I think that the fact that like he did that and he's not Big 12 explosive. He's NFL explosive. So that was very good. Jaden Higgins, also the other receiver at Iowa State, bigger than Noel, 214 pounds, but did a lot of the same things. Not as explosive because he's bigger, but ran a 4.47 at 214 pounds, which is pretty good. And in general, I think also helped himself. So good there, but also like the guy who like shot off the charts from Iowa State is Darian Porter at corner. There's a thing called raw athletic score that people use that you can take all these different drills and combine them. And it's like from 0 to 10. His raw athletic score was 9.99. It's like as high as it can be. He's a corner. He's 6'3" and 197 pounds as a corner. He ran a 4.30 at 6'3". It was the second best 40 among corners. He had the second best 3-cone, which is an agility drill. He had the second best 20-yard shuttle, which is an agility drill. That's at the whole combine. And he's 6'3". He's long and he's super fast. And he only played 694 snaps at Iowa State. So like he was pretty good at Iowa State, but he only played 425 snaps there this year. Like this is wild. 6'3" in those numbers was wild, and he got a lot of people's attention.
He's really interesting because the athleticism was crazy, but he's also not been. He was a receiver at Iowa State. He's not been playing defense that long, and he's like maybe like he's a corner, but like I think he played like in the slot some. Perhaps like could be like a kind of nickel maybe kind of guy in the NFL. That raw athletic score, by the way, what's a Twitter account? Math Bomb.
Yes.
The fourth highest raw athletic score out of 2,005 corners that have been scouted at the NFL Combine since 1987. Not bad.
Wild. Yeah. So this is again one of those like some guy who like kind of played both positions at Iowa State. I don't know what he's going to do, and it's like, oh no, he's like the most athletic guy you've ever seen. Okay, that seems pretty good. Jacob Parrish is a different world, but again, we mentioned it with Kansas State. He's a smaller guy, but also really he's only 5'10", 191. Played a lot of ball at Kansas State, ran a 4.35, which was like, again, really good. Probably a slot corner in the NFL. But like good broad jump, good vertical jump, and to run that fast really helped himself. Another guy who actually had a really good raw athletic score, Hunter Wohler, the Wisconsin safety, had a really good. So we just, again, like some guys who you just got to get their attention a little bit more. As much as they say they'll find you. Right. I do think sometimes I almost think they like it better. If you're at if you're one of the 10 best programs, you're at one of the 10 best programs. And then I almost think they like finding the guys from the super tiny schools. And it's not like guys at Wisconsin and Kansas State and Iowa State get lost, but I think you have to remind them sometimes. So I think all these Iowa State guys, Jacob Parrish, Hunter Wohler, both did that. Josh Connerly might be a first-round tackle from Oregon. I thought that we sort of talked about him as a left tackle for Oregon. We kind of thought of him that way. We ended up talking about him in collaboration with A.J. Cornelius, the right tackle, a lot. I would always say I think they have the best tackle combo in the country. It's like, well, they don't have a Kelvin Banks. They don't have Will Campbell. Neither of those Oregon guys is the best tackle. But Connerly, 6'4", 5'8", 311 pounds, good arm length, had a good vertical, and just like I thought, I'm reading stuff that from NFL.com, they thought he moved well in the drills, and a lot of discussion. This is from NFL.com. It's going to be tough for teams picking late in the first round to pass on him. So I don't think Josh Connerly's at the first cut of tackles, right? But he's probably in the second cut, and the difference between are you late first round or you early day 2 can really matter. It feels like he's going to be a first round pick. Oh, wait. Did I lose Landis there for a second?
Yeah, there's some concern. I don't know. He seems to be like he has a talent.
I think we're having a little difficulty here with Bill. I think his Wi-Fi, is cutting in and out.
Okay. Go ahead, Landis. I think it might be me too.
Now.
Go ahead again.
You got me now. I think my internet died for a second. My apologies.
Yeah. That's all right.
You hear me now?
What'd you say about
cool?
What do you say about Josh Connolly?
It seemed like there were some concerns about like if whether or not he had true tackle measurables, right? But and I guess those necessarily weren't addressed when he was in Indianapolis. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to be 6'7" and super long if you can move like a premier offensive tackle, and it seems like Josh Connolly can do that.
Yeah. Another tackle, again, we'll make Landis cry with tackle talk. Ariante Ursary from Minnesota, 6'6", 331, ran a 5.0140, which is pretty fast for a dude that size. And I think otherwise, again, people seem to like the way he moved. I don't know. We again talked about him in a certain way. He's not in the top tier of tackle, but is this a guy that you think could be like moving to the back of the first round if people fall in love with him? If he maybe crushes it at Minnesota's pro day or anything like that? This guy's a really good player.
Yeah, I think so. I loved him last year at Minnesota. In the last couple of years at Minnesota, and I think he's incredibly athletic for his size. And like it actually does have the measurables at 6'6", 330 pounds. I don't know that he like screamed first rounder to me necessarily, but it seems like he's making a push there. Like I would be shocked if he got out of like the top, 45 picks or so. But definitely making a push. It seems like the back end of that first round.
Yeah. CJ West at Indiana, defensive tackle, ran the 40 in under 5 seconds, which was good vertical. Not going to be a first round player, but this is again is like a transfer portal success story. MAC player goes to Indiana, makes the playoff, really important player for the Hoosiers. And now at the combine is probably looking like a pretty solid second or third round pick and proving again that you can find good athletes in the MAC.
Yep. Big hole to fill for Indiana too. I don't know that people realize that with how well he played this past season, but he's a beast in the middle of that defensive line. And I didn't know he was that athletic. Like some of the combine stuff for him actually kind of blew me away. I knew he was a good player, but I didn't know he was as athletic as he showed he was in Indianapolis.
Okay. Another one that really caught a lot of people's eyes was Ty Robinson on the defensive line for Nebraska at 6'5", 288. Reports were he'd lost 10 pounds since the Senior Bowl, so he got like in running shape. Ran a 4.8340, which opened people's eyes. And then he also had the fourth best bench reps of anybody at the combine with 28. So overall, he had the fourth best raw athletic score among defensive linemen. And this is one of those, Matt Rule was out there saying Ty Robinson's a tough guy and like hard nosed kind of guy. And then it's like, oh, by the way, he's super strong and super fast. And you add that on top of like what people thought of him. This seems propulsive to me that I think is like maybe changing minds. That if you thought Ty Robinson, who I think we might have put on second team all KOTN on the defensive line, we were at least discussing him like a very productive player. But if you thought of him more as like a hard-nosed tough guy, and then it's like, oh my God, he also ran much faster than anybody expected. I don't know. Does that move you up 2 rounds?
It might, because if you would have said before we got all this testing data, like what's Ty Robinson? I was like, well, like settle in for like a bar fight if you're gonna line up across from Ty Robinson for an entire game. But it turns out like yes, he brings that mentality, but he's also pretty freakishly athletic. So I does it move you up 2 rounds? I don't know. But I have a different viewpoint on what Ty Robinson's NFL career might look like after seeing some of that. Yeah.
Isaiah Nair from Nebraska also had a good combine. 6'4" receiver, ran a 4.4, which is really good. We liked him at Nebraska. I didn't make a graphic for him, Mike, but Quinshon Judkins, I think, impressed people with this. Again, it's not just the speed sometimes, but it's the speed at your size.
Yeah.
So like Quinshon Judkins didn't run quite as fast as Travion Henderson from Ohio State, but Judkins checked in at 6 foot, 221 pounds, and also had some good jumps, good broad jump, good vertical jump. And I don't see, like, it feels like there are some people who think like he is in the discussion for the second back after Ashton Genty. Could the combination of the package of size, speed, explosiveness for Judkins put him in that spot?
Yeah, I think it was the explosiveness measurables that came out of this that will help him a lot, because he's absolutely physically an NFL back just by measurables alone. But if you And I think he was like a sub 4.5 too, because I wasn't 100% certain he would be running the 40, like frankly, a great 40 time for a running back who's his size. The running backs were fast. That's the one little bit that I watched because I was curious what Travion Henderson might run. There were a lot of like mid 4.4s among the running backs. It was a pretty fast running back group, but I do think Quinshon Judkins is squarely in that conversation to be the second back behind Ashton Genty. Does that mean first round? I don't know, but second back regardless.
Yeah. 4.48 in the 40 for Judkins. And then the last guy, let's talk wingspan. Biggest wingspan, longest arms, and also the tallest guy, Holland Pierce, the Rutgers tackle, measured at 6'8", and then his wingspan was like 8 feet something, I think, if I read it right. So just
you can land airplanes on his back. Yeah, he's an aircraft carrier with legs.
So you would just, how much would you just be like wingspan? I'm good. Like he's tall and like he can reach guys. You don't have to. If your wingspan's long enough, you don't have to move your feet. You just push a guy. You just stick your arm out and push him.
But I thought he was a good college player too. Like he maybe does he have like starting NFL tackle feet? Probably not. But playing in the Big Ten, like it's not like he got worked over in the Big Ten. He was a pretty good tackle in the Big Ten, and he's massive.
Just reach and push. Reach and push. You don't need technique. Just whack a guy. The guy beats you off the line. Just whack him in the shoulder pad on the way by and knock him off his feet, and you're good to go. All right. I do think so. That's our combine update. We'll probably have an NFL draft expert on before the draft in April at some point, just so we can dig into some of these guys.
Did you see Shadur Sanders coming to Will Howard's defense?
Yeah, I didn't want to get into the Will Howard stuff because again, like some of the stuff we weren't there. We weren't absorbing it. We weren't doing firsthand reporting. And you can find things where you can just look at this player did X. That's the facts. Mm-hmm. And then you can find, everybody does winners and losers list. You can find the same guy on someone's winner list and someone else's loser list. Yeah, right. So I thought there was kind of a consensus that Will Howard, if you go to the right places, if you go to certain places, you can have people saying that like Will Howard had one of the worst quarterback workouts in the history of the combine, that he was just missing everything. But then I saw Daniel Jeremiyah, I think it was from the NFL Network, who's like, he looked pretty good. And it's like, okay, maybe he missed some guys, but like the mechanics and the traits and that kind of thing. So I didn't know what the right answer was, but the fact that one Northern quarterback jumped in, which is what you're talking about, because a lot of people were on the man that looked bad from Will Howard was nice. North defending the North.
Yeah, I also think I watched Will Howard's workout, and like I didn't think it was the greatest thing I've ever seen. Yeah, but I didn't think it was the worst one I've seen either. But if you only consume the NFL Combine via Twitter, I could see how you could be led a certain way. So like, it's an interesting study to me, I think, in how we like kind of talk about the Combine, because like I thought it was a fine Combine performance from a quarterback who probably should be drafted in the 3rd or 4th round. So like, I don't know why we have to be like up in arms about how bad or how good it was.
Yeah. And maybe, I mean, if he came out and was absolutely precise, maybe he would have put himself in the conversation to be the 4th quarterback off the board or something. So it feels like maybe Will Howard didn't do that, but I don't think he's going to be undrafted. So I don't know. I wanted to
he's
sort of
deal. He's not going to be undrafted.
He's not going to be undrafted. I wanted to sort of deal with the Northern guys who clearly helped themselves. And there were some other guys who probably clearly did not help themselves. And that's tough sometimes that, like I think Kyle Monangai, who we talked about before, like didn't have a great combine by almost every estimation. But there are some of these guys.
Johnson had a weird combine.
Tez Johnson had a weird combine. I'm like, if you look at like Jay Higgins' raw athletic score, the Iowa linebacker, it's not great. But is that why Jay Higgins was good? Because of his raw athleticism? Or is Jay Higgins just a heck of a football player? Is that why Kyle Monangai was good? Because he was super fast and explosive, or did he just run over people? And was he able to carry a gigantic workload and elevate a team, right? So, I mean, that's some of that stuff where you get there. And I do think the NFL, we love college football. And the NFL looks at it like a sausage factory. So they don't. And some of the people who cover the NFL and cover the draft, I don't think love college football. So they're just looking at widgets. They're just looking at the assembly line. And they're like, that guy came down the assembly line. Throw that out. It's like, well, that guy played 3,500 snaps at his school and was awesome and helped lead his team to the most successful season ever. And like, maybe he didn't test great. But for the conversation to then turn to like, the heck with that guy. I'm not trying to make excuses, but like, that's not what I want to do.
No,
Right.
I don't have much interest in it. Yeah.
When we're college football up for the draft. We're not draft down. So if you're NFL down and you're just thinking of widgets, fine, do what you want to do. But that's not what we are. So it's not going to be like, oh, Kyle Monungai, one of the losers from the combine. It's been, oh, you mean the guy who I thought should have been the Big Ten preseason offensive player of the year? That guy is a loser from the combine. Okay, right. Well, then who are we to say? Who are we to judge? Do we know what we're talking about? Sometimes we have to test ourselves. We're doing 10 spring breakouts to watch. We just very quickly want to run through the 10 guys we did last year. Jeremiyah Smith was that a good one. He had 1,315 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns in 16 games. He was one of the guys we talked about a year ago on this show as a spring breakout. Good? Was that good? We claim that? Can we claim that? We'll claim that.
We nailed it.
Nailed it. Jeremiyah Love, you want to claim that? That was your guy from Notre Dame. He went from 378 rushing yards to 1,124 and was the highest graded running back according to PFF in the North last year. Did you get it? Did you do it?
Yeah, I think the two we should feel best about are Jeremiyah Love and the receiver you're going to talk about in a little bit. Because some of them were kind of obvious, but yours especially. Yours was a very good call.
Jordan Seaton, Colorado, true freshman, just like Jeremiyah Smith, starting tackle, helped solidify the offensive line, and Colorado had an awesome year. You get credit for that one.
Yeah, he there were times when he looked like a freshman, but I think progressed and got better, and you still see the vision for him, so I feel good about it.
Yeah, see the vision. AJ Harris, was everybody in on AJ Harris, the Georgia transfer, to come kind of lock down a corner spot at Penn State? We were curious, but what Jalen Kimber, the Florida transfer, and AJ Harris, the Georgia transfer, did at corner for Penn State was awesome.
Pretty good.
Was it not?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, I feel good about that one. I'll take that one.
That one. Denzel Boston that we're talking about?
Yeah,
Denzel Boston.
Go ahead and take a lot. Yeah,
I love Denzel Boston. I don't know why I love him so much. He was 15th in the North in receiving yards last year with 837. Actually, in my mind, he had 1,837 receiving yards. It was only 837. He did have 100-yard receiving games in weeks 4 and 5 last year, and that was when I was really feeling myself. And then it's not that he fell off, but like Washington, the Will Rogers working in Damon Williams, I'm not sure and their offensive line wasn't great. I'm not sure Washington had the most productive and like pieces of a passing game last year. And Denzel Boston still was pretty stinking good. And if I'm not just going to run it back, and this should be like, keep watching Denzel Boston, but like, I don't know. Am I on all Big Ten watch for Denzel Boston in 2025? 1,000%.
I think he should be. Well, it's a position that's dependent on stable quarterback play and also an offensive line that keeps your quarterback upright, right? And I think Washington probably got the former. Like, Will Rogers wasn't bad, but the offensive line was pretty bad. So like that doesn't keeps you from like always hitting your stride throwing the ball.
Yeah.
But I think Denzel, if you can get like plus odds on Denzel Boston being a first team All Big Ten receiver before his career ends, I would absolutely take that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the last one I thought we did pretty good on, Fadil Diggs, transfer from Texas A&M, had been at Texas A&M for 4 years. He played a career-high 657 snaps at Syracuse last year. He had the best PFF grade of his career. He had 42 pressures at Syracuse last year. The second most on the team was 17. And actually, he went and had a pretty good NFL combine. We thought this is King Joseph Edwards. Man, that's going to be hard not to call him King Edward Josephs. King Joseph Edwards is sort of it's like same idea, different way of doing it.
Yeah.
Fadil Diggs is a transfer from the South that they got one really good year out of. And I think he was one of the 2 or 3 best defensive players for Syracuse. And again, what he had done at Texas A&M, it wasn't a guarantee that he was going to do that, but it definitely worked. And now Edwards, as a young guy from the South, he needs to be able to do that same kind of thing. But it's all part of the Syracuse is a place where you can succeed, whether you're a transfer or a high school player from the South, come do it. But Fadil Diggs, good, like in the end, truly good success story for Fran Brown in year 1.
Definitely. I think another guy who had a solid combine too, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Some of the athletic testing there too. And we'll always remember the game where they moved Fadil Diggs from defensive line to middle linebacker against Georgia Tech. And he was awesome and they won that game.
Yeah. I actually forgot that. You will always remember that because you have a much better memory than me, but it's a great story. All right. The 4, and again, we're saying, we are calling them breakouts. So there's not just like this is important. It could go either way. So we're kind of, when we're stating these, thinking it's going to be good, but you're not always right. Alex Orji at quarterback for Michigan was one of your guys.
Yeah.
It was so important. A year ago at this time, the most important position in the North was Michigan quarterback. So it made absolute sense for us to talk about it in February, but I get like you thought it had a chance, right?
I definitely did, but I also approached it from the standpoint of like, this is interesting because there wasn't a lot of momentum. Like it just felt like it's like there was logic that he was going to be the next guy, but because of the way that Michigan goes about sort of its off season, a lot of it's closed off. You don't get a lot of information. We weren't 100% sure, so I was wanting to make that be said when we talked about it last year, but like physical profile, running ability, it's like this has a chance to be something, and then it just wasn't. It definitely wasn't.
Yeah, it was super important. It just turned out not to be the right answer for Michigan. I went with 2 like young edge guys who I thought maybe would pop that kind of didn't. Brian Allen from Iowa and Anto Saka from Northwestern. Allen played 255 snaps last year. Saka played 253. They weren't like starting level players.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Saka had 27 pressures and 253 snaps. So like, but they're kind of one-dimensional. And so they weren't winning games with their play. And I thought they're both solid players, but they kind of were more similar to what they had been. They didn't make giant leaps. And then Dorian Singer, the Utah receiver, 53 catches for 702. If the Utah quarterback situation had not completely imploded, you saw Singer potentially as a transfer from USC as an elevator for that offense. And he was. It's just the offense was so bad. Even if he was an elevator, they still kind of didn't even get to the ground floor.
It was a big improvement, I think, from what Singer was at USC. But just didn't have the steady enough quarterback play, I think, to really cash in on it. Maybe they'll have a chance to this year because Singer's one of those guys who's trying to get the extra year with the JUCO rulings.
Okay.
So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, it was, I think statistically maybe like sort of looked like what I thought it was going to look like, maybe a step or 2 short of it, but impact not quite as big because the quarterback situation was so weird.
And not really because of him. He kind of did what he was supposed to do. Actually, 702 receiving yards with like the issues they had at quarterback in Utah last year. It's actually pretty darn good. So, okay. 5 more spring breakouts for this spring football, which again is underway in some places, is starting at a couple other places this week. Next week will be a big week when more schools get going. We have 5 more breakouts coming next on KOTN. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis back. My next guy is an Oregon corner, Landis. Ife Obadegwu. And I think this matters because I think when we did the Oregon, Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State show about what they have back and how they're going to go about trying to replace a lot of the guys they lost. And we came to a little bit of a consensus that Oregon and Ohio State are losing more than Notre Dame and Penn State. And Oregon's trying to replace more of those guys in the portal, and Ohio State's trying to replace a few more of those guys internally. So I do think some of the young internal guys for Oregon really matter because I don't think Dan Lanning I don't think it is the long-term plan for Oregon to just be like, we're going to get 8 new starters in the portal every year. So they have a couple guys at receiver that I almost put on this list: Corian Moore as a true freshman and Jeremiyah McClellan as a sophomore. Who both feel like they could factor in with Evan Stewart in that receiver room. I almost went with one of those guys, which, like, do you agree that those two young receivers are super interesting for Oregon this spring?
Definitely. Yeah. Especially DeCorian Moore, because I think he ended up finishing as a top receiver in the class. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's possible, but I went with corner. They basically blew out their whole secondary. They did we know Dylan Thieneman's going to start at one of the safety spots to transfer from Purdue. Taron Johnson, a corner transfer from Northwestern, could work in here, but Ife Obadegwu is a like borderline top 50 national recruit from Maryland who is going into his second year, basically did nothing last year, really like didn't even really dress, I think, on some game days, did not get into any games, but he's 6'1". He's pretty big and physical, and there's an opportunity here. Jaleel Florence, who actually played a decent amount in 2023, and did not start last year, could work back in here for Oregon. But it feels like the people around Oregon think this guy has a chance to start. He had offers from Bama and Notre Dame and Ohio State and Miami when he came out. He's a second-year player. Oregon won him from the opposite coast, and he's long, man. And this just feels like the kind of thing, this is a little bit like the Cooper Cousins discussion of we have a great program with a great roster. But if you can get an impactful year 2 guy to pop, along with all these other pieces that you feel good about, this feels like, to me, this is how a good team gets to be great. Because it's like, that corner that we recruited was like the number 52 player in the country who didn't play at all in year 1. Yeah, in year 2, he was like a second team All Big Ten corner. And that's a huge thing. So I think when you look at the pedigree of this guy, I think that's possible. And I think it's a chance. I mean, the opportunity is there.
It's there. I would love it for Oregon if they could stabilize the secondary and get off the transfer thing a little bit, especially at that position. And I just think it's time for that recruiting class, which was 3rd in the country. The 2024 class, 3rd in the country. Like, those guys are sophomores. A couple of them got a hit. There's a handful of top 100 guys in there, and Obadegwu is one of them. So it's just like, if you are a healthy national championship, perennially nationally championship contending program, then your major recruiting classes need to start hitting as sophomores. So this is like, he's a stand-in, I guess, for a couple different guys that you can put into that category. But it'd be a heck of a thing if he did hit. All
right. You got a Colorado receiver for us here.
I do. I think we could have taken kind of the two cold river receivers, either of the two. There's Draylon Miller and there's Omarion Miller, who's a guy I'm going to talk about. Omarion Miller is going into his 3rd year, but Colorado loses, I think it's its top 4 guys in targets. Travis Hunter, LeJounte Wester, Will Shepard, and Jimmy Horn Jr. are all going off to the NFL. And Draylon Miller is back and Omarion Miller is back. And Colorado did not go and load up on transfer portal wide receivers. So I think it is content with kind of letting those 2 guys be the top target getters in this passing attack, with Omarion Miller, I think, being more the outside guy, Draylon Miller being a guy who's going to play more in the slot. But Omarion Miller had a huge game last year against Kansas State. He had 8 receptions for 145 yards, but then he got hurt in that game and missed the rest of the year. I guess he could have come back potentially and played in the bowl game, but he chose not to. He is working out, so like, he shouldn't be behind the 8 ball really at all during spring practice. So it's a chance for him, I think, to solidify himself as a potential number 1 guy. He's 6'2", 195. He's got good size. He had a breakout game as a true freshman against USC where he had 7 receptions for 196 yards. So he's got a couple of games under his belt with some pretty impressive receiver production. He's just not yet been in a position where the ball is going to come his way, 8 to 12 times every single game. And now he's in that world. So this is an important spring for him, I think, to kind of establish himself as a guy who can handle that workload. And then for Colorado to come out of it feeling like it's got a pretty good outside receiving option, coming off the heels of really back-to-back seasons where maybe the best thing Colorado had was quarterback and receiver. And now they got to make up for a lot of losses there. But Omarion Miller looks to me at least like somebody who can handle that if he's given a larger workload.
It's just interesting to me that we're even getting to this point with Colorado, because don't you think a fair number of people thought Deion Sanders would be gone with his sons?
Yeah, and you could have, in an honest moment, caught me saying that, I think.
Yeah, that he'll take some NFL job or maybe some SEC job, or somebody will come get him. And again, I think we would have ended up having some arguments about what Deion Sanders meant to Colorado. And I think it would have been, had that happened, it would have been an example, I think, of a program and a person like using each other. And the part thing, like using each other has like a negative connotation. I don't even think that would be negative. It's like Colorado got everything it could have wanted and more out of Deion Sanders the last 2 years. And Deion Sanders to jump from Jackson State and have this opportunity and position his sons and Travis Hunter, who's so important to him, to succeed at the highest level. All of that worked out perfectly. But the thing, it wasn't like they had to choose individual success or team success. They had both. Everybody, Colorado fans had a great time. Like, to get your NIL going, like the boosters are fired up. Awesome. And he's still there. He didn't leave. They're going to keep trying to do this. They went out, got a big-time freshman quarterback, and they got a transfer quarterback. And, like, now they're just, like, in normal college football mode. And normal Deion Sanders at Colorado super intrigues me. Because now it's just like, oh, can he be as good as Chris Kleiman? Can he be as good as Matt Campbell? It's like, I think can he be as good as Kalani Sitake? It's like, I think he can, because of what he's not coaching his kid. He doesn't have the craziest two-way player that he convinced to not go to Florida State. He's just putting teams together. And now I think we've come to accept. Are people still debating Deion doesn't recruit enough? Or it's like, I think, wasn't there some like headline about like he hasn't like gotten on his plane at all. He hasn't done like any like. He
doesn't leave Boulder. Which is a fact. But his assistants do, and they bring the kids to him. It's fine.
Yeah. So like that. Like, are we debating that anymore, or is it just a stylistic difference? Or are we criticizing Deion Sanders for that? Or at this point, they tied for first in the Big 12 last year, and we're a tiebreaker away from making the championship game. It had some really fun games. Have we just accepted this is his way of doing business? And now it's just like, here we go. Normal Deion.
I guess we probably need more data. I mean, I think he only signed like 14 high school kids in the 2025 recruiting class, which is a low number. But I guess there's like also like the quality, not quantity thing there too, if you want to go about it that way. So I don't know. I'd like to see what this next high school class looks like on Deion before. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm wondering about what the actual plan is. He took more high school kids this year than he took the year before. Will he take more in 2026 than he took in 2025? And this has become more of a developmental program than let's reload via the transfer portal program. But like Miller's a guy that got out of high school, and he's in his third year, and he's stepping up into a starting role. So like this is a guy that can help them push them more into the developmental territory.
Yeah. Aren't you interested in normal Deion?
I'm fascinated by normal Deion. Well, yeah. Normal Deion is still very different from most other people's version of normal, but yes.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. I think we're mostly just talking style now, honestly. Yeah. So let's see what happens. All right. Mine's a Wisconsin tackle. Kevin Haywood was a top 100 national recruit from Pennsylvania in the class of 2024. He played all 12 games last year, was like on the, field goal offensive line and that kind of thing. He did have a game where Jack Nelson, the left tackle, got hurt against Purdue, and he played 35 snaps against Purdue and didn't have a penalty and didn't give up a pressure. And people were kind of like, oh, okay. But also it's sort of what you expect from a young tackle who's that highly rated. And again, going through, what do you look for in spring? If you have a giant hole, how can you fill that hole? Jack Nelson was a really good left tackle at Wisconsin. But like this is a kid from Pennsylvania who had a lot of schools after him, who I think picked Wisconsin and because of what Wisconsin does with offensive linemen. Also, if we're out of the Phil Longo world and we're back to a Wisconsin style of offense, this could really matter. This could be a guy who is part of the rebirth of Wisconsin football, right? Mm-hmm. If this is the beginning of the here, right? Because like they're kind of going back. And if we just look at this, the 2-year era at the beginning of Luke Fickell's career where they tried to do something different and it didn't work, and then they went back to what they knew and it did work, this guy's going to be right at the center of it, I think. And I would imagine that, I think we had talked about this on a previous show, there's probably multiple guys, I think, including Jack Nelson's brother, who might be in the mix, but it feels like if you're a top 100 national recruit in year 2 who actually was on the field a decent amount in year 1, Kevin Haywood will probably go win this left tackle job for Wisconsin.
Yeah, then be sort of a stalwart for
Yep.
4 more years probably, right? Like that is we've seen that recipe work out pretty well for
We
Wisconsin in
have.
the past. They have a good right tackle too, Riley Mallman who's coming back. So
Yep.
um yeah, this is interesting. This is interesting. I do think Wisconsin wants to get back to that identity of being sort of like an offensive line driven team, wants to run the ball, just kind of get back to what got them to what's made them a highly successful program over decades and make up
Yeah.
for just as frankly the swing and the miss that Luke Fickell made with Phil Longo. So this tracks. I think if a young offensive lineman goes out there as a freshman, like pops even a little bit, like that means a lot to me because it's hard, man. It's hard to play offensive line as a true freshman. Even like Jordan Seaton, who we talked about in the last segment, like he was a 5-star prospect, as good as it gets as a kid coming out of high school. And like he struggled, and like there's a reason why we don't see a lot of guys playing tackle, especially as true freshmen. So if Haywood did that, even in a small sample size, that means a whole lot to me. And I guess I'd be surprised if he's not the starting left tackle this year.
Yeah, only 72 snaps on offense, and about half of them were in that Purdue games, but just like a little bit of a taste, just a little bit of a taste. And if that's one of those, right? If there are reports from Wisconsin of like, oh, young offensive lineman, it'd be like, oh, everything has returned to normal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The flowers are blooming in Madison and everything is okay. All right. You got an Ohio State defensive lineman.
I do, because I like when really talented players switch positions and what that might look like. So Edric Houston was a 5-star prospect in the 2024 recruiting class as a defensive end, and then midway through last season moved to defensive tackle. Was like kind of after, I guess it would have been around the first Oregon game that Ohio State played, coming off of that off week they had after that. It was like Edric Houston's a tackle now because we think that is where his future lies. And Larry Johnson, Ohio State's defensive line coach, has had quite a bit of success with bigger bodied defensive ends that he turns into interior pass rushers. And this feels like the path that Edric Houston is on. He played 102 snaps total at tackle last year, but he played 55 in the college football playoff, and he had 4 pressures against Oregon. That was the kind of game where he like really kind of popped for me. It was a blowout for Ohio State, so he got a little bit longer run there, but I thought looked really good in doing so. And Ohio State obviously is losing its 2 starting defensive tackles in Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. It's also losing JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer, and like the lingering question over all of it is, where does the pass production come from for Ohio State? And I don't know about the defensive end spot, but I think the answer could be from Edric Houston at defensive tackle.
We have a decent number of these like a second-year big-time 2024 recruits in this discussion here, which is probably where we should be, right? This is still the path that a lot of these guys should be on. So 3 starters back on the Ohio State defense and a lot of opportunity, but there's just, and he isn't at the front of this line. There's some 3rd and 4th year guys at Ohio State who have just been waiting for chances to play more because that group that stayed and didn't go to the NFL and then helped lead to a national championship. Edric Houston hasn't been waiting as long, but like it is going to be a super interesting spring at Ohio State across the board because it's basically a new team, right? It's Caleb Downs, Jeremiyah Smith, and basically a bunch of guys that most people don't know very well.
Yeah, it's those and the interior offensive line. But then aside from that, there's only 3 starters back on defense and none back on the defensive line. So there's Edric Houston and Caden McDonald at tackle that I think Ohio State feels very good about. And then they're on the lookout for depth beyond that, which is going to be maybe challenging to find. But I think Houston and McDonald have a chance to be very good in tandem. Yeah, starters, and they're both McDonald's going into his 3rd year and Houston's going into his 2nd year.
Yeah. All right, the last guy I picked, by Job, who's a 3rd-year defensive end at Kansas, was originally a Michigan State Spartan, was like a top 100 national recruit. 1 year at Michigan State and then transferred to Kansas last year, played 7 games at Kansas, had 9 tackles, but really didn't do much. He played 11 defensive snaps at Michigan State in 2023 and 79 defensive snaps last year at Kansas. But Kansas now, at various levels, they got a guy named Justin Hinckley as a Texas transfer who's going to factor into their edge thing. He's like a 3rd or 4th year guy, but he's a former really big-time national recruit. They have a couple older guys who were former big-time national recruits. And Job fits into that. He's a little bit a little bit like Deshaun McCullough to me, and that like a huge recruiting pedigree and like hasn't hit yet. This is also a little bit of a cheat code because Kansas has started. DK McDonald, there's a guy named, I think this is Kevin Flaherty. There's a guy on Twitter who covers some Kansas stuff who had this quote that I'm using. This is DK McDonald, the new defensive coordinator at Kansas, talking about by Job. His athleticism is unmatched on this team. So now it's time for him to catch up mentally, and that's our job as coaches to do that and keep it simple enough that we can get a guy like that on the field and ready to go. So you're talking here about Bill, like a guy. It's like, what are we talking about with Kansas? It's like, okay, well, you know, they have Jalen Daniels back, who, by the way, is going to miss much or most of spring, their quarterback after like a little knee procedure, I guess. So like Jalen Daniels is back, and, you know, they lost a couple really good corners, but like they're trying to continue what Lance Leipold is doing here. But these are the kind of guys, again, that's why we have guys like this on a list, that it's not a guarantee, but with what people thought this guy was coming out of high school, and he's basically kind of not really played much football for 2 years. If there's something there, can you imagine what it would do for a team like Kansas?
It'd be huge. And Kansas also too neat. Like I was really bummed out when Kansas lost DJ Warner, because he was a freshman last year that just seemed like he had a ton of juice, and he was a great recruit for Kansas that they don't normally kind of get. And then he left after a year and went to SMU. So they needed to replace, like, I don't know that DK McDonald would have said that if DJ Warner were still on the team about Joe, but then like you need to replace that athleticism and that like upside. And like, granted, it's like a different profile and an older guy and someone who's still like waiting to hit, but it seems like a reasonable plan to try to find like a facsimile of what you thought DJ Warner could become at Kansas. So like Kansas needs to like kind of pound the pavement to find guys like that. And this seems like a swing that's worth taking.
I think I said Justice Hinckley. It's Justice Finkley, who's the transfer from Texas, who actually could be like a pretty good strong side end for them and really factor in to what Kansas wants to do. So yeah, I remember we talked about DJ Warner last year. That's too bad. Yeah. But that's the thing you got to do here, right? Transfers in, transfers out. There's a million other guys. Our guy John's in here saying that like Jordan Marshall at Michigan would have been an interesting guy to add to this list as the expected number one running back at Michigan. That's certainly a guy. I mean, I had Drake Lindsay, the Minnesota quarterback.
Yeah, we didn't have any quarterbacks.
And I was like, okay, we're going to deal with that enough. Like we've already done that enough. I had CJ Carr, like the Notre Dame battle at quarterback in here. I mean, we don't only have to talk about quarterbacks all the time. So I'm glad that we got some guys at different positions here. But, you know, I think people know that, and we've run through the quarterbacks enough now that there are a couple like spring battles that are going to determine who the starting quarterbacks are. And I think it's going to be Drake Lindsay at Minnesota, but Zach Pyron, the Georgia Tech transfer, is going to be in that mix. We think CJ Carr might be ready to win that at Notre Dame, but if not, Steve Angeli, the veteran guy, and Kenny Minchie, who I feel like is maybe your guy a little bit, like could be in that mix at Notre Dame. So we have a couple of those. And even like to assume that Julian Sand's going to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State, but like he hasn't done anything yet. Like to get a look at Julian Sand is going to be a huge deal. To get a look at Dante Moore at Oregon is going to be a huge deal. So we acknowledge all of that, but we were trying to find maybe 10 guys that weren't just quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I wanted to try to go off the radar because I would have like Katron Allen at Penn State is someone I consider because like his playoff was so good. It's like, well, what's he going to be now? And like the tight end at Oregon, Kenyon Sadiq, who I've talked about a lot, is like stepping up to be tight end one. And I think he's awesome. But like I've also talked about him a lot. So I didn't want to repeat myself necessarily on him. So there are not only 10 players to watch, I guess, is what we're getting at in the North when it comes to spring football. But we wanted to pick 10 that maybe weren't necessarily on people's minds.
Okay, then that's good. That'll do it for this show. We will be back on Wednesday. Again, Monday, Wednesday is the plan during the off season. We'll continue to start to get into spring football as more and more teams get into that. I do think we, at some point, will have a discussion about spring games, what teams are doing. There are definitely teams, Landis, still doing spring games. Like I think the spring game that you've always thought of that maybe you have to pay money to get into, but you're going to get to see a bunch of guys on both sides of the ball and your favorite team actually playing football. There are teams still doing that, and there are teams kind of not doing that. So I think at some point we need to define that, who's still sticking to the old way, who's maybe trying to do something different. And again, our guy John had brought up in the chat, there's been a lot of movement in personnel departments this offseason in the North, with like more and more teams, and not only in the North. Like Oklahoma hired Jim Nagy, who was running the Senior Bowl, right? And like
it's been like has not like this offseason staff conversation been dominated by general manager movement?
Yeah,
more than anything else. Yeah.
And even it, and who are we to say like, oh, great hire? Oh, not a great hire. I mean, mostly it's like if you've heard of the guy, then media's like, great hire. I talked to that guy at a bar one time. But are you doing it? Are you prioritizing it? Are you creating the position? Are you separating that from head coach? How are you thinking about roster building? And are you empowering somebody who is not your head coach to say, these are the guys we got to get in the portal. These are the way we need to think about high school guys like that. Just the idea of doing that. Many teams are pretty far down the road there, Landis, but I felt like some teams were not. And I think that's not the deal anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Like everybody's there, right? That like we need and some teams are calling them GMs, but like we need a GM. We need somebody who's in charge of personnel who's not the head coach.
Yeah, it's table stakes now in college football. I think you can't get away with not having it.
Yeah. So there's, I mean, again, there's always good stuff to talk about from this standpoint. And again, we are working on some stuff, and maybe we'll tell you more about it down the line. But like we're the 2 days a week that we aren't doing the live shows, like we're not just sitting around. We're using that time to try to create some other things that we think Northern football fans will really care about. So anyway, thanks as always to you guys for being here. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Yorstowski, for making us look good and sound good. We will see you on Wednesday. For now, he's Bill Landis and I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.